Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. The House has approved tax reform bills, exempts military wages and religious funds. The House of Representatives has passed 4 tax reform bills to boost revenue and streamline taxation. Key provisions include a 4% development levy on company profits, with 50% allocated to TEP fund, and tax exemptions for military wages, pension funds, religious bodies, trade unions, and private schools. These reforms mandate tax identification numbers 10 for all taxpayers, stricter compliance measures, and penalties for evasion. Companies must file monthly VAT returns, and banks must report high-value transactions. Petroleum and mining firms risk losing licenses for non-compliance, and new measures include a tax appeal tribunal, a tax ombudsman, and a national single window portal for trade. Small businesses earning below 100 million naira remain tax exempt, while a progressive income tax applies to higher earners. The Senate will review the bills for final approval. Joining us this morning is Biodun Sowunmi. He's a public affairs analyst to discuss this. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. So with Nigeria's current, economic challenges, right? How do you think these tax reform bills would address this? Because, it's a good thing that we know that some of the companies, especially if you're earning less than 100 million, you're tax exempt, religious bodies, military wages, pensions, great stuff, right? But how do you think this would impact the economy right now and address the challenges that we face?
Yeah, already we're beginning to see some improvement in the economy. And what I mean by that is not in terms of whether it has massively affected or have any impact on the living standards of individuals, but in terms of the restructuring of the economy, we are beginning to see some impact. And this will get accelerated, with these new tax reforms. For instance, we used the major source of our income to fund our budget used to be from proceeds from oil. Now, that has declined drastically to the extent that, 40%, oil is now accounting for about 40% of what is needed. So the taxes, being collected currently, internal revenue is now a major source of financing our budget. It has actually exceeded, the receipts from oil. So therefore, the new tax reforms being carried out would, if eventually passed, would drastically alter the equation to the extent that we may end up funding the budget with 70% of proceeds from tax rather than proceeds from oil. Although oil will continue to remain the major source of our foreign exchange until when we can change the picture in relation to production and exportation of goods from Nigeria. But currently, as it is, there are so many brilliant initiatives in the tax. Many people who are poor would be exempted. Many workers will be exempted, from paying tax as long as you are earning 800,000 or below. And then we've seen situations where even the proposal, made by the federal government, only made provision for SMEs earning 50 million or less in a year. Now that has been increased to 100 million. So it would give a breathing space to so many small businesses, while emphasis is on, more efficient tax collection. The current system is so that the onus is on the tax authorities to ensure that if you fail to pay your tax, then they will have to prove it, take you to court and all that. Now, that is shifting to individuals. It is when you are due to submit your self-assessment and you fail to file in the tax self-assessment forms, the money due to you remains due, while also there is a penalty 10% plus interest charges based on the MPR from CBN. So that would ensure that people comply with the payment of tax as soon as possible. We are likely going to see a huge surge, in tax receipts by the country. Many oil companies currently evading tax would be compelled to pay it, otherwise they will lose their license. So also the withholding tax, which many companies will hold, for up to a year before remitting it, that will no longer be the case because they are required within 21 days of receipt to pay the money to the Internal Revenue Service. And there's also a provision for establishment of a tax tribunal to ensure that there can be an adjudicator and also ensure that there are no conflicting laws between the states and the federal. So we are likely going to see, the tax laws streamlined in the state. It will reduce the cases of multiple taxations, which many businesses are complaining about. So I think these are some of the positive things about the reforms being carried out.
Fantastic. I mean, great insight on that. For people who do not really know what this is about, I mean, you've been able to give some valuable contributions on what exactly it is. Now, in recent times, we've seen a lot of businesses close shop. We've seen a lot of industries just move abroad, right? And one thing that has been said is that the business environment is not conducive enough for these businesses to thrive. If we look at the key provisions, there's a 4% development levy, which is a major highlight. For businesses who earn less than 100 million, you're tax exempted. How do you think this supports the SMEs, especially businesses that have been finding it a bit difficult, but now they know that there is a waiver or something that would just even boost their businesses where they don't have to pay that money and they can inject it back into their business? And how do you think, it would impact the business environment in Nigeria?
Yeah, no doubt. Just like what is happening in other parts of the country, just last year, more than 50 companies closed down in the United States. So we have this global problem, which is partly also linked to the Russia-Ukraine war. Then you can also link more now to the tariffs being imposed, the trade wars going on. But in our own case, it's a very different situation. It's not just about the Russia-Ukraine war. We have a very hostile business climate in Nigeria. For instance, the first major task any investor will face in Nigeria is the issue of power generation. And when you now have to start adding the cost of generating your own power using diesel generators, then the goods being produced are no longer competitive. And in a country where the borders are porous, smuggling would eventually impact on the businesses. And that is what we've been seeing going on over a period of time. This now got worsened by the increase in logistics, the cost of logistics, due to the removal of fuel subsidy. So many businesses are struggling and trying to adjust to the new economic realities. While many, choose to stay within the country, or many are still producing, some chose to leave. And in the case of those leaving, at times it's an opportunity for local investors. I can give you examples in the oil sector. We have seen so many companies replacing the multinationals who are divesting from our own economy. So you have local companies, with the resources, moving in to take over those operations. So at times it does not mean when companies leave, it will lead to loss of jobs or end of production, but it could also present a new opportunity, for local investors to move in and take over those operations. That is going on in different, both on the downstream sector and in the upstream sector in the oil industry. But there are also others which may not necessarily be replaced. I can give you a good example, which is Procter & Gamble. We invested $300 million in Agbara plant, but were eventually forced to leave the country. I think they moved to Ghana. But the reality of the matter is the hostile economic climate is affecting everywhere. In our own case, it's only worsened by the power problems, which we are still facing today. And of course, you have the issue of the cost of logistics. But overall, we still present a very good opportunity because of the size of our population, one, and two, because of the AFTA, the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, which in any case will position Nigeria as a good source of manufacturing to supply other parts of Africa. So while on one part we have high cost of production, but this can also be offset by, an open market, which is easier to penetrate from our own country. Yes, you are likely going to continue to see structural changes, in the economic climate. You may have more companies closing down, but you also have more companies, moving into Nigeria. For instance, the Brazilian firm is about to invest $5 billion, $5 billion into livestock production in the Southwest. We also have the Saudi Arabian government, announcing earlier this year that they're investing $1.5 billion, in livestock production. So while it presents some problems, but at the same time, other companies are moving in. There are those who will see the opportunities, who feel that they're moving, and others who may feel constrained or due to decisions taken by their headquarters, which may not even be a Nigerian based, taking decisions on rationalization and reprioritizing their interests. And so, yes, some would leave, but some new ones will also come in.
All right, so if we look at the key provisions, 4% development levy on businesses right now, but 50% of that obviously goes to the TED fund. How is this going to help with education in Nigeria? Because one of the critical sectors that we expect money to be pumped in is the education sector, because at the end of the day, if we have educated citizens, in return, you get to have quality citizens that can push the nation forward. So how is this going to help with the development of the educational sector in Nigeria at the moment?
Okay. In the first instance, we should not forget that one of the major problems being complained about by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria today is the issue of multiple taxation.
Yeah.
What the federal government is trying to do now is to streamline it. And with a 4% tax, on profit, that will not only generate huge amount of money, but will also be beneficial to all the states and the federal government, in the sense that a lot of money will be going into TED fund. And once we are able to get the necessary funding level, we might now begin to look at whether we can achieve the UNESCO recommended 26% to fund education. But no doubt, the 4% will unleash huge amount of resources, and TED Fund is one of those funds that will benefit. If you remembered, part of the criticisms against, one of the fears expressed by some governors in some parts of this country was whether the TED Fund will be, abrogated completely. So we've now realized that that is not going to happen. Rather, the TED Fund is going to get more resources with a view to fund education. We have also seen that the Tinubu's administration had also proposed another source of funding, which is through students' loan to fund education. Over a period of time, you see the university adjusting their tuition fees to reflect, the cost of providing education. And the ability of individuals to pay, may be constrained. So therefore, the TED Fund could also step in with a view to providing another source of revenue in order to mitigate against high cost of tuition fees, which could affect, the education. But generally, the whole idea of funding TED Fund to fund education is to develop the necessary manpower required by businesses in Nigeria. If we do not have the manpower, is either businesses will leave our country, or you will have foreigners moving in, to take advantage of the situation. Because at the end of the day, you cannot run your businesses without having the required human resources. So I think this will go a long way to address the problems we are facing in terms of suitable manpower, for our local businesses.
All right, so the introduction of the new tax, appeal tribunal, the ombudsman, tax as well, is quite new. How do you think they would function? What are their roles going to be to ensure that people are compliant to these tax reforms?
Yeah, I think it's a good development rather than having civil servants and others chasing people. The onus should be on the individual to file their returns. Now, what the proposed tax reforms will do is to create a tax tribunal which will have a jurisdiction not only over federal issues in relation to taxation, but also states. The tribunal will look into issues of taxation, even at the state level. And it's not only that, there will be an ombudsman who can ensure that companies and individuals do not necessarily suffer as a result of overzealousness on the part of tax officials. While a lot of onus is placed on individuals and companies to file their returns, we should also not forget that it has introduced other elements which required companies, including banks, stockbroking firms, to report on revenue in relation to individual. Once it's 50 million or more, they have to file the reports, with the tax, with the tax authorities, with the ombudsman. And not only that, in the case of companies, once it's 100 million or more, the essence is to ensure that they're able to monitor what they are earning with the tax required to be paid. So we are likely going to see an improvement in collection of tax and a better way to resolve, tax disputes as soon as possible. While taxes being withheld by companies, being used, withholding tax collected already, being used, by those companies to run their operations rather than paying it into the federation's account, that picture will change because they only have 21 days to do that. If you required waivers now, the waivers has to be gazetted. Otherwise, gone will be those days when somebody can just sit in the villa and just grant waivers just like that. It has to be gazetted now. So these are new developments which the ombudsman can look into. And when you talk about the tax tribunal, if you claim you have a waiver, then it's for the tribunal to determine whether the waiver is right or not, whether you comply with the conditions to obtain the waivers one way or the other. So, and when you look at, for instance, the abuses going on in the free trade zone, where companies are expected to only export, 25% of their produce to Nigeria, and the 70% country to generate foreign exchange. What we see currently is that many of them are selling almost 80% of their goods into Nigeria. Of course, there are customs officials, in those free trade zones, but you and I know that there are sharp practices also going on, allowing those goods to come into Nigeria without paying the required custom duties and all that, and taxes on them. So all these issues will be dealt with and be looked into, not only by the ombudsman, but by the tax tribunal also.
All right. Fantastic. Now, we have to wrap up. So in a minute, looking at these tax reforms, what are some things or some amendments that you would love to see? And how do you think these tax reforms would help in shaping Nigeria's economy, in the next 5 to 10 years, whatever the case might be? Are we going to see our economy improve significantly?
Yeah, one of the brilliant outcome of the tax reforms, if properly implemented as it is currently, is that it would elevate, the tax to be the next crude oil for Nigeria. We will stop depending on crude oil to fund the economy. But that on its own will not necessarily diversify the economy. It's just increasing tax collections in the country and increasing our potential to fund our economy, using taxes generated. But what I would have loved to see is a more emphasis on reinvesting taxes collected into other sectors of the economy. For instance, agriculture. The kind of emphasis we are playing on education now, we also need to place it on agriculture, because if you don't produce what you consume, you continue to import what you consume. And that basically would not only drain our foreign exchange reserves, it will also complicate our problems. For instance, We are importing grains to the tune of $5 billion a year. And that is bringing, maize. I mean, 60% of what is used, to produce poultry feeds is grain. So why can't we produce the grains with the fertile lands we have in Nigeria? I would have loved to see a situation where government can, pay more attention, to agriculture, just like what they are trying to do with education. Same thing with health. I would have loved to see part of this anticipated increase in revenue from taxes, being dedicated, to health services also, in addition to agriculture. And over a period of time, we would end up being forced to look into some of these areas, sir, because it is the way forward.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, we definitely want a situation whereby these tax reform bills would be something that would help our nation. And like you've said, it's the new crude oil. So if we're going to find ways to generate revenue through that, why not? But one thing we definitely need to look at is ensure that there are no multiple taxations. And I love the waivers, for some of these SMEs, whereby if you earn less than 100 million, you get tax exemption, pensions, military wages, and all of that. So these are good things. I think we're taking a step in the right direction when it comes to reforming the tax system in Nigeria, which is great. And we just hope that we will continue to see these amendments and things that would actually benefit the people. We want to say thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure having you on our program this morning, Biodun. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful day, sir.
You too.
All right, so I'm speaking with Biodun Sowunmi. He's a public affairs analyst, and we were just talking about the fact that the House has approved, new tax bills, and military wages, religious bodies have been exempted from this, and we just hope that we'll continue to see these reforms with our tax system in Nigeria that will benefit the people, benefit the business environment as well. Thank you so much for having the breakfast with me. My name is Rume Paulson. It was lovely having you this morning. I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Good morning.